I do.
Right. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. Let me just see how I can move this off of my screen. All right. So today we'll be going over lean management and what it can do for your industry. So I've seen some of you, many of you are joining me today from the healthcare industry. So I've added a little quick chapter in the end to have a quick view on lean in healthcare. So we're going to go over now first a lean introduction to lean, cost drivers related to waste, the normal lean workshop approach, the 8 success factors for a lean transformation, and then a case study of a full lean transformation for a company done in Saudi, in Riyadh specifically. And then, as I mentioned, a quick view of lean in healthcare, since I saw many participants today are joining us from the healthcare industry. So first, lean management. Yeah, it's basically the Western translation for Toyota, for the Toyota way. Yeah? Toyota Motor Corporation, they started the implementation of lean management in the early 50s. It was then translated into English in the 80s, and in the early 90s, the early 90s was the book that came out called The Machine That Changed the World by Womack and Jones, which was the real, let's say, first serious Western attempt to try to understand Toyota way, and that's where the term lean management was coined. And then later into the 90s, it was expanding more and more so. For example, in Europe, the biggest evidence of that was the transformation of Porsche itself as a car manufacturer in Germany. And it started going to other sectors. And then for us here in the Middle East, basically myself, I started 4 Principles in early 2010, doing nothing but lean management in the region, mainly in Saudi and rest of the GCC. So any lean management project, or the whole point of lean, is that it targets the business enablers, which are your quality, so however you measure quality in a particular process or function, and then the lead time, so how can you do the same thing quicker, and finally costs. So basically a Toyota would look at lean and say, hey, if I can improve my quality and do things better the first time, and then I can do them quicker, so I can do things in less time, if I do both of those, I automatically reduce my costs. Then we have motivation in the middle, because lean is a very bottom-up approach. In other words, it is a way of running your business. However, it's all about including the people who live your processes. So it's not a top-down management approach in the sense of you give the order and everyone follows, but rather it's a way of improving your businesses using the people who live the shop floor. And the idea is, of course, by enabling or by improving your business enablers, you end up, as a business, ultimately having higher profitability. But how do you do this? The idea, and it comes again from Toyota, is by motivating your employees and bringing them into the process of improving your operations. You make your employees motivated and happy, and then they in turn increase your customer satisfaction, which in turn increases your profitability. So how do we look at it? In lean, now first step is we always look at things in terms of value add and waste. So it's always about separating what is value add and waste. Now, who defines what is value adding in whatever you're doing in your operations? It's the customer. And you may have an internal customer, so one department servicing another, or in the end, ultimately, it is your external customer. So the one who's really paying the money, paying for the service. And they are the ones who define what's value. So it's from their point of view, not internally from your own. So it's not the maker of the product who decides what's value adding, it's the customer, whoever is receiving it or consuming it. Everything else is coined waste. Yeah, this is very black and white. So everything that does not add value to the customer is waste. Now, there are these 7+1 types of waste. These are originally come from the lean literature. So if you Google, lean and waste, etc., you'll always find these 7 that originally come from the shop floor, from manufacturing, production. And if we take a look at them, because they can all be in the end translated into the different sectors or different industries. So you have the waste of space. So again, if you have space, which means usually you're renting it or you bought it, you're spending money on cooling it, air conditioning, electricity, so forth. So if you're not using your space productively, it's waste. Then you have transport and movement, and I'll combine them here. Why? Because some people mix between them, but transport is basically the waste related to moving your product or your service around. Yeah, so if you transport your product too much, or you provide, or you do a lot of services that require moving around in your space, too much of it, that's called waste. Movement, however, is the actual movement of the employees. Yeah, so not the goods, but rather the employees themselves, so your skilled resources. That is the difference between transport and movement. Then you have waiting time. This is very clear. Yeah, so you have skilled resources that are waiting idly. Either they're waiting for information or for tools, whatever it is, but they're not being used. Then you have inventory. So it could be, again, inventory of information, inventory of goods, inventory of skilled resources or expensive tools. And basically, inventory is a waste. Why? Because it's frozen capital in the end of the day. And then depending on your product, so if you're manufacturing food, then that means your shelf life reduces and so forth. If you're in cars, it means the car is waiting there while the year model slowly gets older, and then you have the next one coming in. So inventory is waste. And then at the bottom, we have the reworks defect. So everything that is not done right the first time is called waste. Everything you have to basically rework. In the center, we have overproduction. Now, why is that in the center? Because overproduction actually causes all the other types of waste. If you think about it, in the financial crisis, the last one, 2008-9, if you took a plane and you flew out of Detroit, as the plane would turn around the airport, you would see the huge space that Chrysler there had, because basically they kept on producing cars, Jeeps, that no one was buying in the middle of the crisis. So what happened was they needed space to store the cars. The cars became inventory, of course. The cars had to be transported, labor, so people had to also move around to get the cars there. Yeah, you have the waiting time. People and the cars are waiting. Then you have the reworks defects, because the more you move cars around, the chances of scratching them. And then also you have the type of rework, which is basically that the cars get old and the next year model comes in. So that's why overproduction is called the mother of all waste, because it causes all the other types. Then in the bottom, we have the unused skills. And this is something we notice more and more. So again, you find it in every region of the world, but even it's more acute in the GCC, because normally you have a department of maybe 10 people, and usually you have maybe 1 or 2 that are really highly skilled and you depend on from that department. And what happens is, when you have waste happening, these are your firefighters. So normally you'd use this 1 or 2 persons to just firefight the waste. And we basically club this into unused skills of people, employees, because effectively you are using your best resources as firefighters rather than to take the organization forward. Okay, then waste, we can find waste and value add in processes, products, and organizations. So in processes, for example, we have the bottlenecks, double work, rework, waiting time, inventory buildup, having too many interfaces. In the organizations, unclear roles and responsibilities, silo mentalities, so you have different departments basically, each one for good intentions, trying to do its best without aligning with the others, so in the end you have a process that is broken. A good example is always approvals, or signatures. Whenever you need, so if you need 17 signatures to buy a stapler in your organization, then something is wrong. Then the actual product or the service, over specification. Are you giving too much? I always like to give the examples of cell phones. If you think of all the functionality you have in the phones nowadays, you probably think about it and you probably use maybe 4 or 5 functions 99% of the time, and the other zillion functions in there are never used. So that's a kind of over specification, because engineers were there and programmers were coding and so forth. Now, the aim from any Lean project or Lean implementation is to try to increase your value-adding activities by reducing the waste. Now, if we look at the pie in the center, and if we assume this is equal to 100% of your resources, then basically the value-adding part, well, the aim is to increase it as much as possible. Then we have waste, but we have 2 types, unnecessary and necessary waste. So what's the difference? The unnecessary waste, it's basically those are the activities that do not add value to the product or service at all. And the goal is to eliminate this completely. However, necessary waste, those are activities that do not add value to the product or service, but they are required to complete it. So for example, transportation or movement. People always have to move. You have to transport things around in a factory. If you're in a hospital, yes, the doctors have to move, the nurses have to move, people have to go around. The question is, how can you do this as little as possible? So the aim here is to reduce this necessary waste as much as possible, knowing that you cannot eliminate it completely. Yeah, taxes are always nice examples, because again, if you're buying a Mars bar, yeah, a chocolate bar, and suddenly there's a change in tax law, so suddenly, let's say Mars, the HQ in the US says, hey, we need to get more accountants because of the complicated tax laws now. Would you be willing to pay more to buy a Mars chocolate bar suddenly because Mars has to hire more accountants to deal with their taxes? No, right? It doesn't add value to the product, but they have to still manage that without getting into the customer. So the idea is, how do they manage to fulfill the new complicated tax requirements without actually increasing the waste and the cost to the customer, because the customer will not pay for it. Now, basically, the first step to applying Lien is to separate the value-adding tasks from the wasteful ones. That's the first step, because if you look on the left chart here, or the left side where we have the before, yeah, the red circles represent your added value. And normally they're basically mixing your operations, yeah, for different reasons, because that's the way you've always been doing it. That's how it is in history, you know. People get used to doing things in organizations, they get blind to it, or that's how they join and they found things are happening. Yeah, so people get used to it. So the first step is to identify, well, what's value add and waste, and then to separate the value add from the waste. So then the waste becomes apparent. Yeah, because otherwise there's a high risk that instead of reducing or eliminating the waste, you might actually eliminate or reduce the value-adding function. So that's why it's important to separate it, to know where should you drill deeper down. Now, what's very important here, because many people say, okay, Lien, you know, is it all about, fine, if I do something right, I should do more of it? Well, let's clarify this point, because if we look at the top part here, if we say 100% of your resources, again, let's say it's the hours per day of an employee. Yeah, this employee, let's say, is a doctor. If they work, for example, 8 hours a day, and 4 hours are value adding and 4 hours are waste, the objective is not to say, okay, let's please work an additional 2 or 3 hours overtime of only value add. This is not a Lien solution. Yeah, or to say, hey, we have a bottleneck in certain equipment or machines, then hey, let's buy more of them. This is not a Lien improvement or a lean result. Yeah, this is basically throwing money at the problem, which is not sustainable. Yeah, because even if you ask people to work longer, they get under more pressure, they make more mistakes, you have to pay overtime. So these kinds of solutions, they're short-term and unsustainable. Lien is really and truly all about looking at your existing resources, as in the bottom part here, eliminating the waste so that the same resources that are now freed up from wasteful activities can be used instead to add value. And again, one has to understand where this came from, because Toyota itself, it came out of the Second World War completely bombed out. Yeah, so there was a war going on. The factories were completely hit. And for those of you unfamiliar with Japan, it's basically, in terms of land mass, it's roughly the size of the state of California in the US, with half the population of the US living in that California state, and 80% of that state is all mountains. So only 20% of that space, you have to put half of the population of the US. That's Japan. And on top of that, it has zero natural resources. So no metals, no oil, no gold, none of that stuff. It's really just people, mountains, islands, and fish. So to them, Toyota coming out of the Second World War, the above option was not an option. Yeah, they did not have the ability to get more money from the bank or to do weird things. It was all about, again, using the same resources of what they had, how to eliminate the wasteful activities to add more value. And that's where I remember when I was a kid, I would always hear the older people mentioning, steel, they can make, 2 cars in better quality than the Americans who can do only 1 car with 1 ton of steel. And that's basically this whole lean thinking or Toyota way is what's behind this thing I remember. Now, how do you go on about actually, eliminating the waste? Well, we have the 4 principles, which we named the company after, and they're basically derived from the core of the Toyota production system. If you've ever heard of TPS, or Toyota Production System, from the Toyota way, it's mainly composed out of those 4 principles. The first one is the pull principle. And this is all about the downstream processes only taking what is needed, what is required, i.e. the customer starts the value chain by requesting a product or a service. The opposite of this is push. So imagine you're handing over products or services or information to another department where it's actually not required or not requested. So effectively, you're actually building a stock of inventory of products or information or services that are not really required. You're consuming resources, you're building bottlenecks and inventory in the process. So pull is all about taking what you need when you need it and nothing more. Then the second principle, and it's made up of 2 parts, the one-piece flow. And this is basically how do you, well, let's take the one piece. The one piece is all about the batch size. So how much work do I do in one go? Now, obviously, if you're in automotive, it's really simple. If you're building a car, at any one station has only 1 car at a time. Very simple. But what does that mean now if you're P&G and you're doing 12,000 bottles of shampoo a day? You don't do 1 bottle of shampoo. So the idea is, what's the right batch size? How do I organize my time and my ability to manufacture things? The idea here is to take as small a batch size as possible that makes sense. And why is that? Because this way you add flexibility to your operation. Think of it this way. If I need to run a production line, in the example of a production line, and I need to produce my 12,000 bottles, and I have to book 4 days of my plant, only doing, let's say, the green shampoo, which is, let's say, is the anti-dandruff. Now, suddenly there's a change in the market. I cannot stop my operations because I have to wait until the entire batch is completed, which means I will be late in giving the market, I don't know, the new kind of shampoo that they require. Why is this helpful? First, as I mentioned, flexibility. And secondly, it's a kind of a quality control. Because the smaller my batch sizes, the easier it is to detect quality issues or defects latest at the next stage. And then by then, the number or the amount of defected products or services are smaller, so it's easier to rework. Now, the second part of it is the flow principle. And the flow part of the one-piece flow principle is all about the continuation of adding value in every step you do. Every time you have an interruption, so if I'm a customer, or let's put it this way, since many of you are from healthcare, let's say I am coming into a hospital. Well, every time I have to wait, so I go in, okay, hi, my name is Seif, I have an appointment, here's my insurance card, and then suddenly I have to wait 10 minutes because something is being processed. This is an interruption of the adding value to the patient. Suddenly you're called, okay, Seif, please come in, now we have to take certain measurements. Good, I come in, I do that, then I have to go back out and wait again. Well, again, you're interrupting the flow. What happens when you interrupt the flow? First, the lead time to service a patient or a customer takes longer, and then the actual cost of the service increases because more and more resources are tied into it, that are not adding value. So that's the one-piece flow. The third one is the tact principle. And this is all about achieving a rhythm by leveling the work contents. Basically, good examples are end of the month financial processes. If you think of the finance function, they're always the easy example to take in any organization. End of the month, you always see the finance people are really busy and stressed out because they have to close the month, and then they need to gather all sorts of numbers and credit notes and whatnot from every other department. And then usually, first week of the month, they're still catching up on closing and stressing, and in the middle of the month, they're relaxed and quiet. So imagine here the unevenness. The Japanese call this principle, the Tact Principle, heijunka, which means to level out the workload. Now, what happens if you can actually change this particular finances team's operations or the way they work so that every day they collect whatever data is available? Then you eliminate, let's say, the peaks end of the month and the troughs in the middle. So suddenly now you don't have periods where they're really, let's say, not so busy, and then the other periods when they're really stressed out. Now, those three principles put together are known as just-in-time. So if you've heard of just-in-time, it's basically the pull principle, one-piece flow, and the tact principle put together. Now, the fourth one, zero defects principle, this is actually the most difficult one to implement because this is a mindset above all else. And what this is all about is how not to pass problems, defects, from your stage or from your process to the next one. And if you're the next one, not to accept anything that is below the quality you require. Because what we often see in many organizations is it's all about shooting the messenger and playing the politics between the different process steps. So if someone raises an issue, suddenly they are the ones who are, let's say, shot for it, yeah? So people tend to put it under the rug and let the problem go on to the next step. The issue here is with this is that a problem in the beginning of a process can cost you 1 rial to fix. If you let it pass on to the next step, it will cost you 10, and then the next step 100, the next step 1,000, and so forth. So the idea is, how do we have a culture that is open to understanding where problems happen, understanding the root cause, i.e. where it's quick and cheap to fix, and preventing it from happening again, rather than having a culture of finger pointing and chasing the whistleblowers or whoever finds the problem. And that's why this is the most difficult one to fix. However, it is the most important one because this is the principle that enables Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. It basically is derived from two kanji, the Chinese characters. The first one, kai, which is change, and zen, as in what's known as zen. It's basically goodness, etc. So change for the better. And this is basically the mechanism that Toyota, over 80 years now, has been basically applying continuously every day, in and out, how to continuously improve. So continuous change, or in Arabic they'd call it al-tahsin al-mustamir. Now, what's important, basically, if you don't standardize your improvements and you don't put the right, let's say, wedges, your improvements can go back to the way they were at the end of your, let's say, project or push to improve a certain process or function. And that's why we always look at, for example, how to look at SOPs, how to look at what KPIs, key performance indexes that are measured. How do you link this to the incentives of the people who live that process? So the idea here is that the 4 principles, or Lien, is not only about changing a process, but changing the environment around it so this new process and the culture of improvement stays on and doesn't roll back. So it is really a holistic approach. You're looking at the process, the measurements, and the incentives around it, which is always the what's in it for me question that anyone in the organization asks, regardless of their function. Okay, then we're going to go into the cost drivers. Why? Because, again, Toyota Way or Lien, Toyota is a company that is extremely cost sensitive. And basically, waste causes cost, in a nutshell. And the root causes, they're interrelated, and they directly contribute to increasing the company's costs, and they are in 3 buckets usually. And this is not strictly accounting terms, but it's a way of just looking at how waste can increase your costs. So first you have the high product costs. So i.e. this is the waste in your product or service standards, over specifications, low quality, lots of scrap, lots of rework, misdiagnosis, etc. Then you have the high working capital costs. So this is the waste in your planning. How do you have inventories in your process? Long lead times. You're inflexible in the way you perform your processes. So in the end, your business requires a lot of working capital to exist, to run the operations the way it is running it today. Then the last one, the bottom one, is the high capital costs. So this is the waste in your asset utilization. You could have breakdowns, low efficiency, long changeovers, difficult, let's say, or inefficient planning in your machine, especially if you have Like in the hospital, your x-rays, your scans, whatnot. So how often are they really being used? What's the demand out there, and what's the issue? How come you always have lots of people waiting, and you realize that they're only being used a couple of hours of real use time per day? Why is that? So each problem area alone, it drives inefficiency in other areas, and in the end, they end up pushing each other all up. Yeah, so they're all interrelated. And each one of them cannot stand by itself. Each problem you have or cost will in the end indirectly or indirectly affect the others and increase them as well. And that's why there are different methods and tools, let's say within the Lean umbrella, that you can use to tackle these kinds of problems. And again, it could be basically the 3 world-class methods that work together, and it's an integrated approach on working on improving things. You have what is known as total quality management, the just-in-time principles we discussed, but that's really more in the process area to reduce your working inventory costs, and then finally your TPM, total productive maintenance, or OEE increase. And the idea here is that we always have to find, the question is, what's the right starting point? Where is your problem starting? What's the root cause? Which one of these things do you actually take and start working with? Because again, there are many tools such as like Six Sigma and so forth, whatever, but in the end of the day, those are all tools under a Lean philosophy. And the idea is always to know how to choose the right one. Okay, basically, there are 2 kinds of project approaches. Either you really work on doing cross-functional big changes, or you do the basic, let's say, continuous improvement process workshops, so doing the little baby steps. Ideally, it's all about combining them together, because in the end of the day, you have to always look at okay, what are the changes that are required, the big ones, while at the same time doing the continuous adjustments and fine-tuning to make sure things are stable and don't roll back. Yeah, so your innovations are stabilized and continuously improved in small steps until the next innovation comes. If I take Toyota as an example, think of how back in the days they only had the Toyota brand, and then they introduced suddenly Lexus as a luxury segment. And then they had to do lots of fine-tuning to know how to sell in the luxury segment correctly. So what's a luxury showroom like? What's the experience like, so forth. So all of these were the little continuous improvement steps that they did after launching a Lexus brand. Then they had the Prius, the hybrid. That was another big, gigantic step of improvement. But then it took lots of many steps to continuously improve it, and so forth. You can also, many companies today look at it as implementing your software changes. So you're bringing in SAP or Oracle into your organization. Yeah, those are big changes, but then you always think of all the little steps that are required afterward to adjust it and to fine-tune it. Now, normally, there are 3 main process clusters around organizations. You have your management processes, the value-adding processes, and the support processes. And basically, you always find the key to always starting where should I start Lean is in your value-adding processes. And these also can be separated into 4 areas. So the product development process, your product sourcing process, the customer-to-customer process, from the moment a customer places an order or comes in for an appointment or so forth, or books an appointment, all the way until the cycle is complete and that customer is invoiced. And then you actually have the customer service process. So how do you do your follow-up, your surveys, your marketing, and so forth. So all of those are the different areas that we can look at. But always, it is key that you start applying Lean in your core process. Now, if you're in the manufacturing industry, it's your production. Yeah, if you're in a hospital, it's actually your patient care. Yeah, the actual consultations that you do, or operations, or so forth. So, what's your core process? And once you start applying Lean there, you start looking at your other supporting processes. So, whether it's the management ones, or other value-adding activity ones, or your supporting ones. And once you start implementing Lean there, you will quickly realize you potentially have to start looking now into adjusting your organization to follow your processes rather than vice versa. How do you now apply Lean in your products or services? So when you realize that, hey, we have lots of over-specification, over-delivery, or even under, and your suppliers. And ultimately, you have your area strategy. So you become so lean and flexible that you can actually start now using that as an advantage versus your competitors. And I'll come in my example about Saudi to that shortly. And the idea is always with a lean workshop approach, it's basically, let's start with an analysis. So understand first what's going on in your process. Then work on the concept. What's a lean, how would lean look like in that particular area or function? And then the most important thing is about trying, piloting. We always say an 80% solution today is better than a 100% solution tomorrow. Because many people are always worrying, what if and this, and what if that special thing happens, it will not work, etc. So you always have those kinds of, let's say, naysayer attitude, which will prevent any kind of improvement. So the idea is just to try it and see what happens. And then to always include the people who live the process. The Japanese have a word called gemba, which is the workplace where value and waste both are created. So include the people who live the process in your change. Then we have the 8 success factors for continuous improvement. And it's related to the 8 success factors also for any kind of change management, but also this is how you look at them from a lean perspective. Basically, you have the willingness to change, and this starts from the top. You have the process vision. So what does it mean? What's your vision to having a new process? Let's say, okay, I don't want my customers to wait any more than 10 minutes in total, for example. Or I want to be able to deliver any kind of production order within 2 days, whatever. So what's your vision? And follow that. Then, what's the right lean organization? What's the project structure like? Who are the right people from the Gemba to be part of this change? Then you have your implementation plan. So where do I start? Yeah, what's my core process? Where do I get the quickest benefits? Then 5, what are the right tools and methods for my change? That I need to make sure these tools and methods become embedded in my organization, because again, the lean literature, you'll find a zillion tools. Not all of them are value add for your organization, for your processes. So which are the right ones? And then how do you go on about training your people? Both the people in the project, the management, the people who live the process, and then generally all your staff, so they're familiar with lean and what's going on with lean and what's it about. Number 7, how do you have the right process KPIs in there? So how do you measure the right improvements? And then you have your continuous communication. I'm going to go quickly over a company we've worked for lean transformation in Saudi. And these guys basically do traditional Saudi food. And here we started with them by first doing a value stream, understanding what's happening, where, again, from the moment the customer comes in and places a takeaway order, understand the potentials. We started doing, applying our 4 principles in there, doing the adjustments, and in the end, we had amazing results with these guys. And it's a basically traditional Saudi chain in Riyadh. But here's, for example, the replenishment. Yes, we implemented a pull system to reduce the waste of supplied materials from the central kitchen to the restaurants. And basically what happened here was the result, the waste of unsold food from the central kitchen was reduced by 6 million riyals per year, or from 6 to 1.2 million riyals, so more than 80% reduction of the effective, basically, food that was thrown out as scrap, because effectively the central kitchen was pushing. There was no feedback coming in from the branches to the central kitchen about their stock levels and what they need and don't need. And the central kitchen was basically producing according to a forecast that they were deciding on their own without taking into account the branches' input, and then just sending the food over to them. And now we basically have a supermarket, what we call a supermarket. It's basically a Kanban, it's a kind of a tool under the pull principle. So whenever a unit of material is consumed, the signal is sent to the central kitchen to just replenish it. Another example is the central kitchen layout here itself. The end result here was that the new plant layout enabled pull, and thereby reducing the required resources by 40% and work in progress by almost 100, so 94%. And basically what happened here was that there was a lot of movement, lots of unused space in their central kitchen. And again, we're humans, right? Whenever we have empty space, we decide to use it for something, and they actually used it by creating more waste. So it became more wasteful, making things lost. Also creating jobs just for the sake of creating them, because people suddenly use the space to add more things around. They need then more people to move the things around and so forth. And then the biggest one, or one of the biggest changes, was the actual waiting time for the customers. In home delivery, for example, which was around 15% of the total sales, we managed to reduce the overall preparation time from 31 minutes to 16 minutes, almost half the time. And then we're also continuously working on the routes. But basically, we looked at how a driver actually, so they have delivery drivers, and what's the job of delivery drivers? To actually deliver food. And when we realized that their delivery drivers were actually waiting, consolidating the orders in the kitchen and chasing the soup and chasing the salad and all of that, we realized that actually the drivers were not drivers. They were actually more like kitchen staff who happened to have a car. So again, what was the value add here for the customer? That the driver is wasting time in the kitchen, or that the kitchen is efficient so the driver spends more time actually driving and delivering the food? The takeaway lead time. This is the biggest one. The customers here before, you used to have an average waiting time of almost 12 minutes. They don't receive their orders in sequence, so a customer comes after you and he gets his food before you, then you flip out at the restaurant. And basically you have to go around to different windows to pick up your items. And it was a huge headache for them. And then the peaks were the Fridays after the Friday prayers. And today, basically more than 85% of the waiting time is now gone, and any order can be delivered within less than 3 minutes, even during the peaks, including Fridays, while maintaining the quality of the food, i.e. everything is fresh. There is no McDonald's solution here, so nothing is preheated or so forth. So you get the same quality good food in a shorter lead time, with less staff and less work in progress in the kitchen. So if we look at basically some total high-level numbers, with the addition of the sales increase, without increasing the headcount, because again we use the resources that they have better. Actually, the headcount was reduced, so now they're using the same trained, skilled people in the organization to man new branches, and the overall waiting time, it was reduced. Actually, these numbers are a bit more accurate now. They're newer ones, so it's actually less than 2 minutes. And if I take some more interesting ones in here, let's take this one here. Okay, the work in progress inventory reduced by over 60% in the kitchen. This is also great. And these are just examples of Lean solutions, or the kinds of benefits you get from a Lean implementation. And now, before my time runs out quickly, I'll go to just examples of Lean in healthcare. And this is basically, as for principles, we didn't have the opportunity to work with healthcare yet in the region, but this is from my, let's say, previous life in Germany, where I worked with a clinic. But basically, if we look at the weak points in the wards, you have the excessive communication coordination efforts, you have the pre-operation times here for the customers, the operating rooms. This is always waste there. You have low utilization rates. In this particular case, only 49% of the time it was being used. The patient inward process, also, they had lots of postponements, revocations of admittance, so forth, incomplete patient information preparation, no clear roles, responsibilities between the different nurses and the different functions, and lots of interfaces. But the idea here is, what does quality mean, for example, in a healthcare environment? It's always good to look at the customer satisfaction or the patient satisfaction. So admissions planning, the number of contact people you have to talk to. So how many people will always ask you to fill out your name and information, and how often does this happen? To know the transparency, you're always waiting, you don't know why you're waiting. Lead time, again, basically the time of the patient waiting there. The postponement of operations. The actual patients following the predefined and standardized clinical paths. And then you obviously have the costs. So how can you actually serve more patients or see more patients using your same number of nurses and doctors? Obviously, the more you do that, the more you increase your margin. Examples from the projects done in the hospital. This is again in Germany. Nothing to show here, unfortunately, not yet. But we have, for example, here outpatients. How Lean can help. You can reduce the patient waiting time. You can increase the patient out-calling care handling. You can, if we look at bedroom management here, reduce patients' mean residence time. Sorry. Operating rooms, those are always the best ones. The changeover time, so how to prepare an operating room once you're done from one operation and prepare it for the second operation, because that's always a drag. Yeah, it's like a machine. When you say you're changing machine from doing, again, the anti-dandruff shampoo to doing the smooth silk shampoo, whatever, an operating room is no different. Yeah, except your changeover here is the actual how to clean, how to have the right tools, how to change the doctors, and so forth. And then same thing here, the letter writing medical doctor, yeah, for writing the letters or prescriptions, and so forth. But those are just examples of how Lien can benefit you in a healthcare environment. And I'm basically pretty much done at this point from my presentation. I'm not sure how I was doing time-wise. And maybe I can hand this over back to, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Seif, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are open for the question and answers. You can either put your question in the chat box or you can raise the hand icon available on your webinar console. Okay, so let me go straight to the first question that what are the benefits of getting external support to get an organization to start its Lien journey?
Okay, so the first one is basically most companies, yes, you do have capable resources. The question is, first, have they been there so long that they became used to the way things are? So that's always one thing, that you've gotten used to what you see, so now you're blinded to what is value adding and what is wasteful, simply because you've been there long enough. And secondly, because those good few resources are actually busy, as I mentioned earlier, most of the time firefighting the problems that are happening. So they don't really have time and cannot take the time to step out of their normal functions for a few weeks and actually do an improvement project. Okay?
Hello, Mr. Seif, are you there?
Yes, I'm done.
Okay. Okay, we have another one, and that is, what are the biggest risks to Lien not working?
All right. The biggest one by far, what we've seen, is always top management, yeah, the buy-in. How serious are they about a Lien change? Because Lien, again, to do a Lien change, first of all, it's a long-term objective, so it's not the fashion of the month type of thing. And they are the ones who really have to walk the talk. Yeah, it's there's a German proverb that says that das Fisch stinkt vom Kopf, which means that the fish starts stinking from the head. And that's basically how to describe this. So if the management is not really fully on board and willing to go all the way, then forget about it. Don't waste time and money actually trying to change or to apply Lien. So the management decision, the buy-in, this is the biggest factor actually. Next question.
Okay, thank you. And we have another one from Mr. Suhail Bajamal. You mentioned in the presentation that Six Sigma is one of the Lien tools. I have read book titles about Lien healthcare and others about Lien Six Sigma in healthcare. From what I understood, Six Sigma focuses on patient safety and minimizing errors, while Lien focuses on improving efficiency. That's his question.
Okay, look, so again, Six Sigma is a tool. It's a highly statistical tool. Yeah, you're always following the Six Sigma. And again, yes, correct. It is usually used for quality control. Yeah, to look at your deviations from your standard. But again, it is a tool, right? And again, times within the Lien framework, because Lien is a mindset, it's a philosophy. So sometimes it is a useful tool. So if you're in pharmaceuticals, or chemicals in general, where you have these big mega monster machines and you're producing something inside and it comes out as a finished product on the other end, Six Sigma is a good tool to measure these deviations from your standard and how far are you and where do you have to improve. But it is ultimately a tool. Yeah, Lien again is a mindset. Sometimes this mindset within a particular function or process would require some tools like Six Sigma and sometimes not. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you once again. And I have one more. Just hold on a second. Okay, I have another one. It is in lean implementation, many times processes that are not visible result in wastes that are not visible. What are your views?
Yeah, look, it's always, so again, you have, normally when you're producing something, you're either producing something tangible, which you can feel and touch, and this is rather easy and quick to understand what's value adding and not. And then sometimes you're producing something intangible, like a service. Yeah, like again, healthcare is a nice example. You're actually, checking a patient, you're investigating them and so forth. And so you're doing a service. And that is always more difficult because people look busy. People are running around. People are walking and they're looking through papers and stuff, and everyone looks really busy. The question is how much value add are they actually adding by being busy? It's the same thing if you step into an office. Everyone's busy on their computer. But sometimes people are copying data from Excel into the ERP system because they're living in Excel, even though the company has an ERP system, so it's double work. Sometimes they're on Facebook, and sometimes they're actually doing something useful. But if you just look from the outside, everyone looks busy. So yes, it requires, let's say, different skill levels or experience in lean implementation to apply lean in a setting where your product or service is intangible.
Thank you, Mr. Seif. We have another one from Miss Anastasia. I'm just unmuting her, and she'll be asking the question directly. Hello, Miss Anastasia. Can you please ask the question?
Yes, it's not a question. It's just a comment.
Okay.
I want to mention how interesting was the presentation and how proud we are and happy to know that there are people of this caliber in the region to spread and support the lean system thinking. Thank you very much, Mr. Seif. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anastasia. Thank you, Ms. Seif. Ms. Seif, we have another one, and that is, are lean processes technology dependent?
Okay, good question. Many companies or people think it is. Actually, it is not. Normally, from at least the experience we have here, when we like to pilot, let's say, the lean solutions with companies, first we like to do it as, let's say, analog as possible. Why? Because first, you will see the benefits, quickly and test your solutions, see how they work. And then after that, after the process is stable, the company is getting the benefits, then you can quantify, is it worth automating this? So how much do you save by actually automating this versus using man hours or whatever to actually keep it running in a manual way? Yeah, so that becomes a different discussion. Now, honestly, many times with the existing resources that companies already have, you can do tremendous lean improvements. And it is not technology dictated. If you look at actually Toyota and Porsche, from all the automotive manufacturers around the world, they are the ones that use the highest percentage of manual labor in their production facility, because they still believe, and rightly so, that humans are your most flexible resources. Machines are not. So there you go. If the most advanced company in Lean or Toyota Way, Toyota itself, which by the way is the most advanced robotics company in the world, has the highest share of humans manual labor in their production facilities, that tells you something. Yeah, again, Lean is about just doing improvements and not about technology.
Mr. Seif, we have another one from Mr. Mohsin Abdullah. He's asking how to present Lean implementation to get the early buy-in from top management.
Okay. There are different things that can be done. Honestly, from our experience here, the most effective thing, because one of the options we do for our clients is we do, I'm not sure if it's the right way to say it here online, but a brainwashing trip where we take our customers to Japan and show them Lean, yeah, so actual companies in similar industries as those of our clients applying Lean in their industries. Because, seeing is believing, and that's usually the most effective way to, knock out top management into believing what you're doing. However, we've had many cases where top management really believed from the very beginning that, hey, we know we have a problem in our organization. We know we are wasteful and inefficient. So the question is this the right way? Now, normally we like to start, in this case, with doing, and we recommend doing small pilots, small projects that show the impact. So it's all about getting the quick wins and getting the quick victories, even though small, to show management, hey, look, we, with a few weeks and a few resources, we managed to get you this improvement. Can you give us now something a bit bigger, give us a bit more resources to get you a bigger one? So you slowly bring them in. That's another approach.
Thank you, Mrs. Seif. Ms. Anastasia wants to say something else. I'm just unmuting her. She'll ask you directly. Yes,
Sure.
Go ahead, Ms. Anastasia. Hello.
Yes, hello.
No, not really. Sorry, it was still on. No, nothing to add. It was by mistake. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you. Okay, that really brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you, Mrs. Seif, for a very interesting presentation. This brings us to this end. I'd really want to thank you on behalf of Madinah Institute of Leadership and Entrepreneurship for your valuable time and information. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar, and thank you for the questions. We are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on the YouTube and MILE community. So please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org for updates and for downloading a soft copy of this presentation in case you have missed it or you want to